Most aquariums don't die because of bad luck. They die in the first setup decisions, before a single fish ever hits the water. And if you've ever lost shrimp for no obvious reason, or watched a brand new tank slowly fall apart over a few weeks, I promise you this: the answer was almost always hiding in those early choices. The choices most people rush through because they're excited to get to the good part. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what equipment you actually need and what's unnecessary, how to design and plant your tank for long-term stability, how to prepare your water correctly, and, most importantly, the 6 quiet mistakes that wipe out shrimp colonies while the aquarist has no idea what went wrong. I'm saving the most damaging of those mistakes for near the end, because it's the one that catches people who feel like they already know what they're doing. Stick around for it. Let's start at the very beginning. The first decision you make is also the one most people get backwards: tank size. And I want to say something here that might go against what you've read elsewhere. Bigger is almost always easier. Not more expensive to run, not harder to maintain, easier. If you're setting up for neocaridina shrimp, the colorful hardies you see most often at fish stores, you can technically make it work in a 5-gallon tank. But a 10 or 20-gallon tank is dramatically more forgiving. More water volume means slower temperature swings. It means slower shifts in water chemistry. It means more time for you to notice a problem and respond before it becomes a crisis. The idea that small tanks are better for beginners gets repeated constantly, and it's simply not accurate. Small tanks are cheaper to buy. That's the actual advantage. In terms of day-to-day stability and how much margin for error you have, a 20-gallon tank will be easier to keep alive than a 5-gallon tank in nearly every situation. New hobbyists who start on small tanks end up fighting problems that wouldn't exist if they'd started on something slightly larger. Now, if bamboo shrimp or vampire shrimp are on your list, the size requirement goes up. 20 gallons minimum, not as a guideline, but as a genuine lower threshold. These are large, filter-feeding animals. They fan the water column constantly, pulling in suspended particles and microorganisms. The more water volume you have, the more natural food there is drifting through it. In a tight setup, bamboo and vampire shrimp slowly decline no matter how good your filtration is. They're not getting enough to eat, even if the water tests perfect. For a tank that mixes shrimp with small community fish, think carefully about how much room everyone has. In a crowded or undersized aquarium, fish will stress shrimp, sometimes fatally, even fish that are broadly described as peaceful. Having space to establish territories, scatter across the tank, and avoid each other when needed makes a real difference. The filtration question comes next, and there is no single right answer here. It depends on what you're keeping, how you want the tank to look, and what your long-term goals are. Sponge filters are genuinely excellent for shrimp tanks. The surface of the sponge becomes covered in biofilm over time, a living layer of bacteria, fungi, and microorganisms that baby shrimp feed on directly. For a breeding colony where you want shrimplets to survive, this is hard to beat. The sponge also acts as a physical barrier. Baby neocaridina shrimp are tiny enough to get pulled through an unprotected intake, and with a sponge filter, that risk doesn't exist. They're quiet, cheap to run, and effective in small to medium setups. The main downside is visibility. Sponge filters take up space inside the tank, and they're hard to hide. If the look of your aquascape matters to you, that might steer you towards something else. Hang-on back filters give you more control over flow rate and media choices, and they can be tucked behind hardscape elements so they're less visible. The single most important step with any hang-on back is covering the intake with a pre-filter sponge. Without one, baby shrimp get pulled in and lost, and you won't see it happening. This goes for canister filters too. Cover or wrap the intake every time, without exception. Canister filters shine in larger setups, where you want powerful, consistent flow and a lot of biological media. Bamboo and vampire shrimp actually benefit from stronger current. It brings food to them rather than making them hunt for it. Hill stream loaches and similar current-loving species have the same need. Well-oxygenated, moving water is not a stress for those animals. It's part of what keeps them healthy. One thing worth saying directly: you can over-filter a shrimp tank. Extremely fine mechanical filtration running at high flow can strip out the tiny suspended particles and microorganisms that filter-feeding shrimp depend on. Clean water is what you're aiming for. Sterile water, where almost nothing is suspended, can actually work against you. A little natural material drifting through the water column is not a flaw. In a shrimp tank, especially one with bamboo or vampire shrimp, it's food. Leave some of that biological diversity in the system. If you want to try a filterless setup, relying entirely on plants and substrate to handle filtration, that is a real and viable approach, but it takes more experience and more attention early on. An air stone helps by creating surface agitation, which is where the actual gas exchange happens. Oxygen entering the water, carbon dioxide escaping. Those rising bubbles look like they're doing the oxygenating, but it's the surface disturbance that actually does it. A filterless tank built on a strong plant load can be incredibly stable. Just go into it with realistic expectations. Research it thoroughly first, and be prepared to test your water more frequently in the early months. Now, here's something I want you to hold on to while we go through the rest of this. There is a section coming later about water preparation that most hobbyists treat as a formality. It isn't. That step, done correctly or skipped carelessly, is the single most common reason a well-designed tank loses shrimp in the first week. Keep that in mind as we go. Heating is next. Neocaridina and a mono shrimp are genuinely adaptable animals. They can handle temperatures from 65 degrees all the way up to 82 degrees, though the sweet spot for active feeding and breeding is somewhere in the low to mid-70s. Bamboo and vampire shrimp prefer it warmer. 74 to 82 degrees is their comfort zone. If your room stays consistent year-round without much fluctuation between seasons, you might not need a heater at all for a neocaridina tank. But if your home heats significantly in summer and cools in winter, a heater set at a stable 74 degrees gives your animals something your room temperature can't reliably provide: consistency. Here's the principle worth writing down. Cooler water slows everything down: metabolism, growth, breeding activity, molting frequency. Warmer water speeds everything up, but run too warm for too long and you shorten lifespans, reduce dissolved oxygen, and push your shrimp's metabolism hard in a way that ultimately burns them out. A stable mid-range temperature, held steady day after day, is almost always better than chasing the high end of the range. One more thing on temperature. The risk isn't usually the average, it's the swing. A tank that sits at 72 degrees consistently is far safer than one that dips to 68 at night and climbs to 78 during the day. Those swings are stressful. A heater with a reliable thermostat is one of the best investments you can make in the stability of your system. Lighting is one of those topics where the advice can go in completely different directions, depending on what you're growing. If you're keeping low-light plants, Anubias, Java fern, mosses, Bucephalandra, you don't need a powerful light. A modest LED run on a timer for 6 to 8 hours a day will keep those plants healthy and encourage steady biofilm growth on their surfaces. For shrimp, that biofilm is more important than the plants themselves. Shrimp graze on it constantly throughout the day. It's their primary food source in a well-established tank. For tanks with more demanding plants, carpeting species, fast-growing stems, red plants that need high light to hold their color, you need more light, and usually CO2 and fertilizers to match it. High-intensity light without CO2 and adequate nutrients doesn't grow beautiful plants. It grows algae. The light drives photosynthesis, but plants need carbon and nutrients to actually build tissue. Without those, excess energy from a powerful light just fuels algae instead. What matters more than intensity is consistency. Your plants, shrimp, and fish all benefit from a predictable photoperiod, the same number of hours of light at the same time every day. That stable rhythm helps regulate algae growth and keeps the tank's biological processes in a steady pattern. Use a timer. Set it and leave it. A tank where the lights are on 12 hours one day and 6 hours the next will have algae problems that a consistent 8-hour schedule would never produce. One caution worth repeating: keep your tank away from windows where it can receive direct sunlight. Indirect light near a window is manageable. Direct sun hitting the glass will cause temperature spikes and algae blooms that are very hard to control. The lid often gets dismissed as optional equipment, and then people stop dismissing it after they find a shrimp drying out on the floor. Amano shrimp in particular are notorious explorers. They'll climb filter tubes, airline tubing, cords, the edges of the glass, and eventually right out of the tank if given the chance. Small fish will jump during water changes, when startled at night, or if there's a sudden disturbance near the tank. A glass or acrylic lid handles all of this, and also reduces evaporation, keeps out pet hair and dust, and protects your light fixture from splashing water. The one thing to keep in mind: don't seal it completely. Gas exchange has to happen at the water's surface. A small gap at the back, or a lid with ventilation slots built in, is all you need. Carbon dioxide has to be able to escape, and oxygen has to be able to enter. A fully sealed lid traps gas and slowly suffocates the water. Small opening, big difference. In a larger tank, a wave maker is worth serious consideration, especially if you have any dead spots where flow doesn't reach. Those low circulation zones accumulate waste. Uneaten food and debris settle there, decay, and produce ammonia slowly and invisibly. By the time you notice a parameter shift, the problem has been building for days. A wave maker prevents this by keeping water moving throughout the entire tank. It distributes oxygen more evenly, brings suspended particles to filter feeding shrimp, and prevents the buildup of waste in stagnant corners. Aim the flow across the length of the tank or toward the front glass so the current diffuses naturally rather than blasting directly at plants or shrimp. You want circulation that feels like a gentle, consistent stream, the kind of movement you'd see in a slow-moving river. If substrate is getting kicked up or plants are waving dramatically, the flow is too strong. Dial it back until everything settles. We are now about halfway through, and we haven't talked about hardscape, planting, or water chemistry yet. Hold tight. The water preparation section is coming, and that's the one that changes how you think about every setup you do going forward. Let's talk about what goes inside the tank. Substrate, whatever lines the bottom, is doing significantly more work than most beginners realize. It anchors plants. It provides enormous surface area for beneficial bacteria. And depending on what type you choose, it either actively affects your water chemistry or stays out of it entirely. For most shrimp tanks, an inert substrate, fine sand or gravel, is the safest starting choice. It won't push your pH up or down. It doesn't release anything into the water column. It's easy to maintain, and beneficial bacteria colonize it readily over time. For neocaridina tanks especially, this is usually all you need: simple and stable. Aqua soil is a different category, and it's worth understanding before you decide to use it. This is an active substrate, nutrient-rich, designed to feed plant roots, and formulated to lower pH and soften water. It's excellent for caridina shrimp, the more sensitive species like crystal reds and bee shrimp that need soft, acidic conditions, and for heavily planted tanks where the plants are a priority. But aqua soil has one serious drawback in a new setup. It releases nutrients rapidly during the initial weeks, which can trigger algae outbreaks and unstable water parameters before your tank ever has a chance to find balance. If you use it, cap it with a thin layer of inert substrate to slow that initial release, and test your water regularly. Aqua soil rewards patience and close attention. It punishes setups that aren't being watched. Bare-bottom tanks, no substrate, are a legitimate choice for breeding tanks or minimalist shrimp setups where easy cleaning is the priority. Every bit of debris is visible and easy to remove. The trade-off is that plants are limited and the aesthetic is less natural. For a functional breeding operation, none of that matters. For a display tank you want to enjoy looking at, it probably does. When choosing stones for your hardscape, think about water chemistry alongside appearance. Limestone, Seiriu stone, and some other popular aquascape stones contain calcium carbonate, which gradually raises water hardness and pH over time. That's perfectly suited to neocaridina, which prefer harder water. For caridina setups, you want inert stones. Dragonstone and lava rock are both good choices that won't push parameters in the wrong direction. Rough, porous textures on any stone are a bonus. They host more bacteria, more microalgae, and the tiny crevices become hiding spots and grazing areas for baby shrimp. When arranging stones, cluster them in odd numbers, groups of 3 or 5 rather than 2 or 4, and vary the sizes and angles within each cluster. This creates a natural, organic look rather than something that reads as placed. Most importantly, make absolutely sure everything is physically stable before adding water. A stone that shifts later can damage your glass or crush a shrimp, and both outcomes are avoidable with a few extra minutes of attention at setup. Driftwood adds depth, warmth, and function to any aquascape. It releases tannins that gently lower pH and color the water a soft amber, natural, harmless, and actually mildly antibacterial. If you prefer crystal clear water, soak or boil the wood for several days before adding it to pull out most of those tannins in advance. If you appreciate the warm, tea-colored look that many hobbyists love, embrace it. The amber tint from tannins has a calming, natural quality that makes a planted tank feel genuinely alive rather than artificial. Spiderwood, cholla wood, and manzanita are all excellent choices for shrimp tanks. They host biofilm beautifully, perhaps better than any other surface in the tank, and over time, plants like Anubias and Java fern will attach their roots to the wood and grow directly on it. When arranging driftwood, think about how it directs the viewer's eye. Use it to create a focal point, to frame an open swimming area, or to anchor the midground of your layout so it feels integrated into the scene rather than dropped in from above. Plants. This is the part that surprises new aquarists the most, because people tend to think of plants as decoration. In a healthy shrimp tank, they're infrastructure. Live plants absorb excess nutrients, ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, before those compounds can destabilize your water. They produce oxygen through photosynthesis during the light period. They compete directly with algae for the same resources, which means a well-planted tank is its own best algae management system. And for shrimp, plant surfaces, especially fine-leaved plants and mosses, are covered in biofilm. That's not incidental. Biofilm is one of the primary things shrimp spend their days eating, grazing slowly and methodically across every surface in the tank. For beginner-friendly shrimp tanks, the safest and most reliable choices are Java moss, Christmas moss, Anubias, Java fern, and Bucephalandra. These plants attach to rock and driftwood without needing to root in substrate. They thrive in low to moderate light. They grow slowly, which means trimming is infrequent, and they're nearly indestructible. Even if something goes wrong in your first weeks, these plants usually survive it. Getting a few of these established early on gives you a base layer of stability while everything else in the tank is still developing. For variety and height in the background, stem plants work well. Rotala, Ludwigia, Limnophila, Hygrophila. These grow quickly and absorb nutrients fast, which actually makes them useful for nutrient control in a new tank. Foreground plants like Cryptocoryne or dwarf Sagittaria add depth and create naturalistic layers at the front of the layout. And floating plants, Salvinia, frogbit, red root floaters, dwarf water lettuce, provide surface cover, soften the intensity of light coming from above, and give both shrimp and fish a sense of security that open surface tanks often don't offer. One caution with floaters: they spread fast. A thin, patchy cover is beneficial. A solid mat of floaters, blocking out all light from above, will starve everything underneath. Scoop some out every couple of weeks. And if you keep labyrinth fish, bettas, gouramis, paradise fish, always leave open surface area. Those animals have to breathe air directly from the surface. If it's completely covered, they can drown. When you plant, think in layers. Tall, bushy plants in the back where they get light but don't shade the foreground. Mid-height plants in the middle section. Short, creeping plants or mosses at the front. This creates visual depth and ensures that plants aren't competing with each other for light. If you're just starting out, keep it minimal. A couple of mosses, 1 or 2 attached plants on a piece of wood or stone, and a handful of floaters. That combination is balanced, visually interesting, and genuinely easy to maintain. Don't panic if plants melt back in the first 2 to 3 weeks after being added. That's extremely common. Plants sold at fish stores are often grown immersed, above water, or in different conditions than your tank. When they hit your water, they shed those leaves and begin growing new, submerged, adapted growth. It looks alarming. It's usually fine. Give them 4 to 6 weeks before drawing any conclusions. The plants that look half dead at week 2 are often lush and spreading by week 6. Now, water. This is where every tank either holds together or quietly falls apart. Everything living in your aquarium, shrimp, fish, plants, the beneficial bacteria inside your filter, depends on water that is properly treated, stable in its chemistry, and given enough time to mature before any livestock is introduced. Most people use tap water, which is fine in many areas, but tap water almost universally contains chlorine or chloramine. These chemicals are there to make drinking water safe for humans. For aquatic life, they're directly toxic. They kill beneficial bacteria and harm shrimp and fish, even at concentrations that are invisible and odorless. A quality dechlorinator is not optional. It's the first thing you use every single time you add water to the tank. For the initial fill, for every water change, every top-off. A good dechlorinator neutralizes chlorine instantly. The best formulas also break down chloramine, detoxify heavy metals, and temporarily neutralize ammonia in an emergency. Follow the dosage on the label. More is not better. Overdosing a dechlorinator can cause a temporary drop in dissolved oxygen, which stresses your animals. The right amount, applied consistently, is what you want. Beneficial bacteria are the invisible foundation of your entire system. They live in your filter media, your substrate, on rocks and wood, on every surface inside the tank. Their job is to process waste, converting the toxic ammonia produced by fish and shrimp into nitrite, then converting nitrite into the far less harmful nitrate. This is the nitrogen cycle. Without a fully established bacterial colony, your tank cannot safely support life. A new tank has no such colony. It has to develop, which takes time, typically 3 to 4 weeks under normal conditions. The colony builds up in response to ammonia being present. Some hobbyists add a pinch of fish food to kick off the ammonia source. Others transfer filter media or substrate from an established tank to seed it with bacteria already. Bacterial starter products can accelerate the process, but they're a supplement to a biological process that still takes time. There is no shortcut around the nitrogen cycle. A water test kit is the tool that tells you where you actually stand. Liquid tests are significantly more accurate than test strips. Test for ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, and pH at minimum. In a properly cycled, stable tank, ammonia reads 0, nitrite reads 0, nitrate is low, below 20 parts per million, and pH is stable within the preferred range for your specific animals. During the cycling period, test weekly. Once the tank has stabilized, you can pull back to every couple of weeks, or anytime something significant changes. After a big water change. After adding new plants or animals. After returning from time away. Water clarifiers are useful tools in specific situations. After heavy maintenance or in a new setup where fine particles are clouding the water, a clarifier binds those particles together so your filter can catch them. But there is one situation where you must not use them. Any tank that contains bamboo or vampire shrimp. Those animals are eating what the clarifier is designed to remove. You'll strip the food out of the water column while the tank looks clean and the shrimp slowly starve. If you have live plants, liquid fertilizers help support their growth, especially in tanks with inert substrate that provides no root nutrition. But not all fertilizers are safe for shrimp. Copper is present in many standard fertilizers at concentrations that can become toxic in a shrimp tank over time. Shrimp do need trace amounts of copper for metabolic function, but they get that from food. Extra copper accumulating in the water column through fertilizers is a different matter entirely. Look for fertilizers labeled specifically as shrimp safe. Start with the lowest recommended dose and observe your shrimp. Active, grazing shrimp are a reliable sign that your water is in good shape. Sluggish or hiding shrimp after a fertilizer dose is a sign to stop and reassess. Reverse osmosis water is worth mentioning for anyone who has struggled to get stable parameters from tap water, or who wants to keep sensitive neocaridina species. An RO system strips the water entirely, no minerals, no chlorine, no contaminants. You then remineralize it precisely to the target hardness and composition you need. It gives you complete control. For breeding sensitive shrimp, or for anyone who has been losing shrimp consistently without being able to figure out why, an RO system often turns out to be the answer that was missing. Whatever water source you use. The single most important thing is stability. Shrimp are far more tolerant of water parameters that are slightly outside the ideal than they are of parameters that keep changing. A pH of 7.4 that never moves is better for your animals than a pH that bounces between 6.8 and 7.6 every few days. Consistent temperature, consistent hardness, consistent routine. Same dechlorinator, same water source, same schedule, every time. Stability is what keeps shrimp alive long term. Don't chase perfection, chase consistency. Before we get to the mistakes, and we will, let's talk about one more thing that shapes long-term success: your maintenance routine. Because a great setup only stays great if it's cared for the right way. Small, regular water changes are the heartbeat of a stable aquarium. 10 to 20% per week is a sustainable rhythm for most tanks. The goal of a water change isn't to replace old water with perfect water. It's to dilute accumulated nitrate and replenish trace minerals that get used up over time. A tank running on no water changes gradually accumulates nitrate, organic compounds, and trace element imbalances that erode stability slowly and invisibly. Regular small changes prevent that drift. The key word is small. A 95% water change in a tank full of shrimp, even with perfectly treated water, creates a massive and sudden shift in parameters that can be fatal. More isn't better. Consistent and moderate is what you want. In doing a water change, temperature matters as much as chemistry. If the replacement water is 5 or 6 degrees colder than the tank, that sudden drop shocks your animals, even if the dechlorinator is perfect and the parameters are ideal. Let your change water come to within a degree or two of the tank temperature before adding it. It takes a few extra minutes. It's worth it every time. Vacuuming the substrate during water changes removes accumulated detritus, the fine organic material that settles between grains of substrate and decomposes slowly over time. In moderation, detritus is actually beneficial. It feeds beneficial bacteria and provides grazing material for shrimp. But in excess, it becomes a source of ammonia and a breeding ground for harmful anaerobic bacteria. Light vacuuming of the visible areas during weekly changes, without disturbing every corner of the substrate every time, keeps that balance in check. One thing experienced aquarists learn quickly: when something feels off in your tank, the answer is almost always a water change first. Cloudy water, shrimp behaving oddly, a slightly elevated ammonia reading. A 20% water change with properly treated water is the safest first response in almost every case. It dilutes the problem, reduces stress on your animals, and gives you a clearer picture of what's actually happening before you start adding chemicals or rearranging the tank. The longer you keep aquariums, the more you realize that good maintenance isn't about doing a lot. It's about doing the right things consistently at the right scale without panic. Now let's go through the mistakes. These are the things that quietly destroy tanks while the aquarist wonders what they did wrong. Mistake 1. Adding shrimp or fish before the tank has finished cycling. This is the single most common cause of early tank failure, and it is completely preventable. Without an established bacterial colony, ammonia spikes fast the moment an animal starts producing waste. Shrimp are particularly sensitive to ammonia. Even a brief spike that a fish might survive can be lethal. Wait 3 to 4 weeks minimum. Test your water. 0 ammonia and 0 nitrite is your green light. Nothing else is. An uncycled tank also has no biofilm. Shrimp depend on biofilm as a primary food source. Add them to a sterile new tank, and they can starve even in water that looks and tests completely fine. Mistake 2. Cleaning too aggressively. This one is driven by a very understandable instinct. A clean tank looks healthy, so more cleaning must mean more health. But beneficial bacteria colonize every surface inside your aquarium: the substrate, the filter media, the glass, the rocks, the wood. If you do a massive clean, scrubbing everything, rinsing filter media under tap water, vacuuming the entire substrate at once, you can crash your nitrogen cycle in a single session. Keep maintenance gentle. Partial water changes of 10 to 20% at a time. Light algae removal from the front glass. Filter media rinsed in tank water, never tap water. Leave the rest alone. The goal is a balanced biological system, not a sterile one. Mistake 3. Overfeeding. Uneaten food breaks down into ammonia. That's a direct, unavoidable chemical relationship. Shrimp graze constantly throughout the day on biofilm, algae, and decaying plant matter. They don't need much supplemental feeding, especially in a planted tank with established biofilm. Offer small amounts and observe carefully. If food is still sitting on the substrate 2 hours later, you gave too much. Scale back. Overfeeding is one of the most reliable paths to a water quality crash, and it sneaks up on you because excess food often hides under leaves or in substrate crevices, where it decomposes invisibly. Mistake 4. Overfiltering in the wrong way. There's a version of overfiltration that removes biological diversity rather than protecting it. Very fine mechanical media running at high flow can strip fine suspended particles and microorganisms from the water column, the exact material that filter-feeding shrimp like bamboo and vampire shrimp depend on for food. In that kind of setup, your shrimp will waste away while the water looks pristine. Leave some biological material in the system. Let some fine debris exist. The ecosystem needs that diversity to sustain itself. Mistake 5. Making sudden changes. This one catches experienced hobbyists, not just beginners. You notice something off. pH higher than you'd like, temperature drifted a couple of degrees, water harder than usual, and the instinct is to fix it immediately. Don't. Rapid parameter shifts are far more dangerous than stable parameters that are slightly imperfect. If you need to adjust pH, do it gradually over days or weeks. If you're doing a water change, make sure the replacement water is within a degree or two of the tank temperature before adding it. Sudden corrections shock your shrimp in ways that gradual improvement never would. Consistency beats perfection, every single time. Mistake 6, and this is the one I promised to save, is rushing the balance. Every new tank goes through an awkward period. Cloudy water, a small algae bloom, parameters that seem to fluctuate even though you haven't changed anything. New aquarists often panic during this phase and start adding products, adjusting things, cleaning more, doing bigger water changes. Each intervention disrupts the biological processes that are trying to establish themselves. The tank never gets a chance to find its footing. That messy early phase is not a sign that something is wrong. It's the tank doing exactly what it needs to do. The single most effective thing you can do during those first 4 to 6 weeks is test the water. Make sure nothing dangerous is happening, and otherwise leave it alone. Resist the urge to intervene. A tank that is set up correctly, given time to cycle, and not disturbed constantly during that process almost always finds its balance on its own. The aquarists who succeed long-term in this hobby share one habit above all others. They learned to be patient. They set things up thoughtfully at the start. They waited. They tested. They made small adjustments slowly when adjustments were needed. And then, usually around week 6 or 8, the tank clicked. The water ran clear. The plants took hold. The shrimp were active and feeding and exploring. The algae leveled out. What felt like a problem became a tank that practically ran itself. That's what every good setup decision you make today is building toward. Not a perfect tank on day 1. That doesn't exist. A stable tank at month 2. A thriving, self-sustaining tank at month 6. Every patient choice compounds into that result. So tell me something. Have you ever set up a tank and had those first few weeks go sideways? Shrimp dying for reasons you couldn't figure out, water clouding up, plants melting all at once? What happened, and did you ever track down the cause? Drop it in the comments. I read everything down there, and those stories genuinely help other people watching this realize that what they're going through is normal and fixable.